Hi, I'm Harlan Emil Gruber, and welcome to Portal to the New Earth. Today, I'm really excited to be here with the architect Glen Howard Small, who is one of my life's biggest inspirations. I learned about his work while I was studying environmental design at Parsons School of Design, doing this project on future environments, and came across this magazine called Futurist that had an image of his incredible visionary city design called the Biomorphic Biosphere, which we're going to be explaining here in detail today. And when I saw that magazine, I was just enthralled and did as much research as possible on his work and included that in my senior thesis on future environment. So now he's included in the book I just released, Portal to the New Earth, so you can get to see his project outlined there. So anyway, Glen, thank you so much for inviting me to your studio today. We're here in Joshua Tree, where we both are living at the time, and I'm really excited to go into detail on this and learn more about you and your work.
This poster I made at the completion of the Biomorphic Biosphere, which was around 1972, and I sent out to all around the world, and I got lectures that way. And but what it does is I want to explain the growth pattern of this biomorphic biosphere. And this drawing here shows the gridiron pattern that's existing in Los Angeles at the moment. This is Palos Verdes down here, and this is the ocean out in here. And so you start, and this is over here, way up here is the downtown LA. So it starts in this area that's sort of blighted, and probably around Watts or that area. And you start by building over existing buildings so it doesn't tear anything down. But as it gets bigger, you move the people from the ground into the structure, and then they have a place to live, and you can clear out what they were living in underneath it. And eventually it goes to this scale. And if it fails, you just turn it into a Disneyland or something like that. But if it makes sense, you continue it, and it starts to clean up the land. You see, this one has more cleaned area, and you just have the major freeways and a few things happening. And eventually it gets to the point where you have these little points, like this is Santa Monica, and then you have parts of downtown, or you have the valley and out in Pomona and things like that, and San Pedro, that you keep for, historic reasons. You go down to visit on Sunday afternoon and things, but everybody is living in the structure at this point, and that's the way it works. And so I was doing this, and I had all these overlays that like this one is the growth pattern. These arrows show which way it's growing, okay? And then this one's the structural pattern. This is the skin in here, and then this is the major tension members on the skin, and the compression members are these tent poles. And then this is the wind pattern of how the winds blow. There's certain areas that you can tap for, windmills and things like that are very efficient now. They don't have to have the big spinning ones, but you have these. Anyway, they're just improving all that stuff. So it's doing all the studies of how it would affect it. And then you have the park system here, and then this is another basic structure pattern. And with this one, I was sort of saying our hand does the same thing. We have our hand like this in the original state, but you start to study all the bones, and this is the bones, and then you see the muscles and everything that starts to interact. So it's an overlapping of systems that fits all together. People look at this and they just sort of glance at it, but there has all this written information if somebody really wants to get behind it. And so anyway, I was pretty proud of that, and it's still what I like about it, it's still relevant today as when I made it, right? So it has something to do with carrying on, and it's going to last way beyond me.
When I learned about this project in 1984, while I was studying at Parsons, it was already over 10 years old. This is something that you started developing, I think, 1969 and developed for the next several years into the early 70s, called the Biomorphic Biosphere Megastructure. So I'm just so excited that it's still, to this day, it's 50 years later, and it's still extremely futuristic, and you're working with technologies that on one hand may be practical, but on other hands are super fantastic. And I'm just really excited to go into the details of, this, because I'm sure it's going to inspire a lot of people as to what is possible, to how we can completely reconfigure urban cities from the two-dimensional sprawls that almost all cities are into this three-dimensional megastructure. So please let's just dive right into talking about it, and because there's so much that you can explain, and the vision is just so complete. You've worked on it, to such extensive detail.
Yeah, I was inspired by Paulo Soleri. I went to visit him and saw that he was working on urban problems, and he was working with ecological interests at the time. But what I sort of spun off is I got very involved with people like Buckminster Fuller that was more into technology. So I think I took off from Bucky's and that thinking, because I was an architect, and I'm very visual. If it's not good looking, I don't want to be associated with it. So I'm into that category, and so that's what got me going on the biomorphic biosphere, and so it's the largest scale urban planning thing that was developed that I know of, and it's a whole region of thinking, of bringing everything together to make it totally ecological. And eventually, when you build, it's in a gradual problem where you sort of span over existing buildings in any city, because that's where the problems are, and you start moving the people into the new structure, and as the new structure gains and gains and gains, you start eliminating the buildings on the ground, and you restore it back to its natural state. And when Los Angeles, Portola came through, and initially, and there was deep rivers and game running all around the basin and everything like that, and now you look at the sprawl and the cement and all the crap, and they're suddenly having to deal with water, and they don't know how to do that, and and yet they're addressing it, and they're discovering that was all real. What I was doing, that was the way I was thinking a long time ago, and so my concern is you have to think regionally to get to the point, and you got to think big enough. And whether we've got the apparatus of all the government hurdles and this and that and all the stuff to make that happen is very extraordinary, because we don't seem to have it. And what occurs is that, and Harlan can attest to that, you look at this thing and you just say, that's a futuristic thing. It really doesn't have anything to do with the practicality of reality. But if you get into it, you start to study it, like Fry Otto is intention structures, and this is sort of an extension, but at a larger scale and things like that. All the technology is there. And so when I did this, I looked at the technology around, and I wanted to use, as any society or part of history, they take the technology of their era and they push it to be the maximum, so they do the best they can. And you can see that with the Romans and on and on. So it's nothing new. It's just we're in this new technology. We should use it in a manner that solves our problem. And it's ironic that, this person, Tom Main, which is rather famous, right? He's an architect, and he's now doing I think it's 110 miles or 120 miles.
In Saudi Arabia?
In Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, that's like the antithesis of this, and yet it's the same.
Right. It's a large scale, 110 miles long, 1,500 feet long, and it's 2 football fields wide.
Anyway, let's not talk about his stuff. We're here to talk about this, and you're talking about Tom Main. Let me interrupt you, because you mentioned Buckminster Fuller and Paulo Soleri being key inspirations for your work, and that is who I also were the two people that super inspired me. So when I came across your work, I instantly recognized that it was a synthesis of both of their work, because Paulo's idea of arcology, architecture and ecology, it had certain shortcomings because he was just working in very old-fashioned cement technology. Buckminster Fuller, on the other hand, was pioneering incredible forms of technology, most famous for the geodesic dome, but also tensegrity, which you use in this, and all of these other fantastic cutting edge technologies to create this fantastic city. So I think we really should just dive in, and we want to just have you explain in detail everything you've thought out about how this city, which is built above the existing cities to allow the existing cities to go back to nature, all the different aspects of it. We have this right here, the incredible drawing that you have of a cross section of it. So is it...
Well, and just in preference, I mean, Harlan, you're beating me up a little here. I have to let you in on the secret of why this is relevant today, and other people are joining in the big push. So this is relevant now. And so, and if you built something like this, you'd probably have all new attitudes and people to come and make it more efficient, I'm just an architect giving an idea, and this was the best I could do 55 years ago. If I had to do it today, it'd probably be a lot different, or, up to scale or something, but I'll explain what we can learn from this. The whole idea was to be an inspiration to inspire others to build it, because we want to build it. That's the idea.
So can we dive into this? I mean, what we see here is this huge city that's miles across over the LA landscape. And I know, you have all these charts and diagrams, and then we're going to go through amazing, amazing images of it that we see right here. So if you just want to start with the overall concept of what we're looking at, and then go into some details, and then we'll go through all your other fantastic illustrations to really dive into this biomorphic biosphere megastructure.
In principle, it sits on a series of points, just like your fingers would fit, and once those points are down, then the rest of the body is being held up by those points. And those points are these sort of strange feet that look like chicken legs or something, but they're the transitional point that is connects to the ground, and the ground is now being restored, and the drainage and pools and lakes and foliage and animals are coming back. And the idea is that you have basically it's a tensegrity system, but a tensegrity system is made up of two different things. It's not quite a tensegrity system because the compression and the tension never touch, but in this case they do touch. But the members are these compression members. Like you see here, this big cross, basically, and I have models of how it does it more three-dimensionally, but that is like in a tent. Like if you went out camping, that would be your tent pole, and it's like a big cross. And then you have the skin of your tent, the fabric that's on your tent, and that's the skin, and it's this lighter element that goes all the way around it. And so that's basically the scheme. So these compression members connect, and they keep marching along and connected together, and you move through the compression members. We'll show you diagrams of how that all works. And people live on the compression members like it would be more commercial, higher density colleges and things like that, and industry. And then on the skin you have, it's next to the sun and it opens to the weather and everything. It's the element where people live. And it's so huge, like a Grand Canyon, that they have on the inner side of that skin, you look into this gigantic canyon. And the water, because we're trying to make it totally self-sufficient, it is self-sufficient. It produces all the water, all the food, and all the social interaction, everything you need to survive without having to go somewhere else. And yet, probably one city would be special in this, and you'd want to go to the next city, but we're talking about LA here. Okay. And at this time, LA was 11 million, and we were going to make that happen there. We're going to go through these drawings now, and we'll come back to this tension and compression and things, and walking on the skin and things like that. But this is a cross-section is if you took your body and just chopped it open and you looked at all the parts inside. So that's what we're looking at on here. And the next drawing is when we're inside. We're actually now inside this huge canyon, and this is the skin on the right over on this side, And the compression member is down here in the middle, running through there. And it keeps going. And with the skin, as I said, encompasses that and goes around it. So you have this member, sort of big crane dropping a flying house, which you'll finally get to, or a house modular, into the skin. And you have people dancing and having a good time and kids playing.
It's all green, too.
Right.
Like lush gardens.
It's all tropical. That's the whole thing. You
control the climate.
Right.
Yeah.
It takes, once you have a large volume, it takes very little energy to control the climate. So, although you would have some probably, at the bottom it'd be warmer and cooler at the top, and so on, things like that.
And of course, look, even birds are living inside of it.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, we'll get to it in a bit, but I see one of your transportation pods. I know you'll be talking about that later, but just what an incredible vision and rendering of this space to live in.
This pod here, we can talk about that a little, is that it's a movement pod. It would be you're considered now your car. And what was interesting to me, and it's happening, I knew it at the time, but nobody believed me. But there was all these other people that had flying cars at that time, 55 years ago, talking about it and so on, Buckler Rogers, and there's all these fancy watches and all that's coming to reality. It's gone beyond that. It's even further advanced. So that's all happening. Anyway, so you can scan this thing, it's like one of those German paintings with a little town. You have to keep looking at this part and that part, and then you'll discover.
You see all the way down to the reservoir over there. Right. And there's a lot going on. Well, of course, we have so many more drawings that go into detail. Right. So anything else in this particular one?
Well, these are all the mechanical systems in the bed of the track, and then this car modular is on the underside of the walkway. And so it's separated from the pedestrian, so the kids can play, and there's no chance. I know you show that in some of the other drawings. Right, maybe should we move ahead to the next one? Right. And there's
it's another view looking down towards the reservoir, and we see the tensile skin with the homes, and
this is the reservoir being down below. It's near the ground, so it's the heaviest weight and holding it down, and. So, you're looking down at that compression member that's going into the water. This is the compression member.
And these are the various businesses and public spaces that people along the compression member live, but it's all filled with greenery and water. And then on the outer skin is where the more private residences are.
Right.
And they get to look both outside the city and back into this space. Right. Yeah, what a vision. That is incredible.
So
it feels like I'm living there looking into it.
See, a lot of people look at it as threatening, but I look at it as enabling. I mean, a dimension that everybody would love. And I must say, even on a small scale, building anything I've ever done, when it gets built, people love it, okay? So people have a hard time relating to something new, but when they finally get in it, they just say, well, fantastic. They don't like to change. That's the thing. Anyway.
Well, this is sure a whole lot better than a suburban sprawl and driving to the mall. But let's keep going and see. I'd rather come from that outer skin to this central. Now, this is obviously a detail of where it interfaces with the ground. This is the foot structure you talked about earlier, and the reservoir and the compression member. So let's see. And also we see the skin and the homes here too.
The idea, I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but when they do dam building, the pressures of the concrete are so big that the companies have to freeze the ground to make it rock hard, so when they pour the concrete, it won't keep going into the earth. And so it's a form of making a form out of the earth by freezing it. That's been around for a long time. When I was doing my investigation for footing, I came across that, and that was perfect for what I needed. So these rods go down in the ground, very little temperature, like 6-7 feet in the ground. You can keep constant temperature with very little energy, and keep it frozen. So that works, and that's the idea. But this acts as, because this structure I haven't explained it. It expands like your body. It's like a small rabbit getting bigger or something, or like a person's body when they're very small and they get bigger in every dimension. So it expands in a three-dimensional pattern. And with that expansion system, you have to be able to move the footings. And so this is like a snail where it just keeps going across the earth, moving apart like this and putting rods down. And certain rods are going down, other rods are coming up as you're moving and defrosting and so on.
So I think it's important to point out the scale here. Here we see these are full-size trees that are probably like 100 feet or so. Here we see built into the foot a parking garage. These are levels of parking garage with your conventional cars that you would come to the city, where you would then transition into the new futuristic pods, which would then go up these compression members. So what we're looking at here is maybe nearly 1,000 feet high to begin with the whole entire city being several thousand feet high. And just fantastic. But, you know, it's such a beautiful drawing, but to really understand it, it's important to understand the scale of what you're envisioning. And like I said, we can see this is the beginning of the outer skin structure here, and this is the compression structures that have the more public spaces built into that. So,
and the neat one on this one is into the reservoir, so you're sitting in these modules looking at the water and the fish swimming.
So you're underwater. That part goes underwater. Right. Amazing. Amazing.
Anyway,
wow. All right.
So anyway, these are the housing units and so
which we'll get into detail coming up. You have amazing details of those.
Okay.
Oh, now here we are inside of a compression member.
Right.
Okay. And you can see it's filled with these pods, both in trains. These are how they move through the space. And wow.
Yeah, the modular, as I sort of described, is a round ball, and it's not the most efficient shape. Actually, if you pointed it, you know, I did some with pointed shapes later on, you know, aerodynamic, but the round ball has a sufficient, and it also can clip together to other balls and create trains and things like that, and eventually get to some transportation system like an airplane that's circulating continually around the globe that you clip onto and drop off of and things like that. Anyway, so that's, but what I was thinking, and it hasn't been done, I don't know why, but rather than making it a solid steel thing or something like that, which all our cars or even our plastic ones now are doing, why don't we just make it soft? You know, airbags and all that stuff are helping us save our lives, and they're all about bouncing off things or surrounding your body so you don't get crushed. And so why don't we go to a soft world and make it all work that way? And I had one diagram, I had a guy carrying a suitcase, and then it became his unit, it became the thing, and things like that.
Well, that's like from the Jetsons.
Right.
Which this is going towards. And
well,
look at the greenery, because that you're going to get to, but the way that this works is that it's fully integrated with growing, ecological, plants and all of that.
It's a plant. I mean, it's overlaying systems. I have all the diagrams of transportation.
Right. It's a living city.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, right.
But socially, we haven't talked about that. You don't want to just drop the same people in here. The same people would be coming in here, but you got to change their mindset. I mean, you don't want them killing each other and all the other stuff. You want
crime in the
or blowing themselves up. Somebody says, "Oh, it's a perfect place for terrorists" or something. That's not the idea. We have to evolve.
Well, I think it goes hand in hand. Living in a space that's created like this will help to evolve your consciousness and your social way of being, because you're in such a beautiful environment. So it goes both ways. Well, anyway, should we move on to the next illustration?
All right, this is
what else in here?
This is the compression member. You see these triangles here? That's the frame. And inside the frame, you have these plug-ins. It's Archogram English group who made that sort of famous, the Peter Cook and gang. But you plug something onto the skin, basically, and they remove it or put it on. And that's the idea here. You create the frame, which is solid and strong, then you plug things as you
right. So
run.
Houses, anything can be connected to that.
Right. And if it's not in vogue anymore, you can take it out and recycle it, and that's it, And the idea I haven't told you about, but if you build this thing, it sequentially starts small and gets bigger, bigger, bigger. And you find that you no longer need this big thing. It can start eating itself, so it can go back and get smaller, smaller, smaller. It's got all these machines, and this is one of the machines. It's a computerized building machine from a node, and what it does is it structurally is a node. You know, a node is like your right here, part of your finger. That the bone comes into a bone, and this is the flexible part, the node. Okay, that's the node here, and from the node you build, and so you push out from this, you bring in raw materials into the node, and it starts excreting out, and as it excretes out to make a structural frame, then you encrust it with foliage, and as it gets further out, the foliage gets more mature, and it eventually just becomes this green frame.
So this is how all the compression members in the city are made.
Right.
These like manufacturing nodes. So the city is basically growing over time. As it gets bigger and bigger, these structural members will grow and attach to other nodes to form the actual framework. And basically the last picture we were looking at was actually like looking down the inside of one of these completed structural members, which then become places for businesses and people and things, you know, to inhabit this city.
Right.
This is just fantastic. And I know at this point, though, I want to show, you didn't have it in a drawing, but you have that photograph of that model, which then shows how these nodes will all connect into the bigger structure. Right. So we'll put that into the video here, because that was a really great image to kind of understand how this is connecting and making the whole entire structure of the city.
What I had to have is another project. I did the green machine we won't go into that came after this one. And I hired all these consultants. And you got all these nerds that can do this thing 5,000 times better than I ever thought of doing. So they're just waiting. They're hungry to do it. So
exactly. I'm sure people are going to be watching this and going, oh, I get this, and I can really make it happen.
Right, yeah. And I can bring this to it, and I can bring that to it. And I get all this stuff, recycling plastic and this. Every day there's something new happening in our world.
All right, well, that's the structural members. And now I think the next one, yes, are we ready?
See, one of the principles was to recycle the existing cities, you know. And if you know the Berlin Priodo thing, it was a World War II bomb site. All the buildings were sitting around, so they mounded the ground and things like that. And so that's all part of it, restoring the cities that exist.
Speaking of Priodo, who's so famous for these tent-style structures, those beautiful tent-shaped things that are very similar to what this city looks like, except for yours is 100 times bigger. But this is the detail of how the tensile fabric skin of the city would then be shrouding the entire structure.
This is a computer, and it's pushing out the skin, which is excreting the thin membrane and creating a web. You can see just go shopping and you throw some apples into a bag, and that bag expands or goes back, and that's sort of the same idea here.
A tensile kind of skin.
Right, and it's very strong and so on.
And like the compression members, this is the machine that's making it so that when the city is being built and when the city is expanding, it continuously is producing and creating the skin. So it's like the city really is a living structure.
Right. Mm-hmm. So this is a typical street here we got, and what you can look at this and you say, what are these different parts? And these balls or wild things are the doors to go into the houses, and they're along the street. And this thing's, I think, are about 25 feet wide or something, and kids are playing, and the structure, since it's encrusted with foliage and so on, becomes a tree that the kids play on. They climb up and they jump on it and and they hang on it, and this is the car from above. It is out of their range, and it's not going to hit them, and so that's the world they live in. So.
Right, and then of course we'll get into it later, but this is one of the homes with people up there that's at another level.
Right.
So yeah, it's just amazing. Wow.
Yeah, that's the next level up, yeah. So.
Right. Wow, and you can see in the background there's one of the tower compression members going up there, and
that's
down the street. Just incredible. I want to live there. Let's build it.
Yeah, I really should sock that one in harder so it jumps out that compression. Anyway,
It's a lot going on there, but once you see all the other images, you kind of put it all together.
And everybody's happy, and there's no problems. That's the problem. That's probably the downer. Probably there's some
Don't go there.
Little jealousy or whatever going on.
Let's see. Oh, wait. Good. We are segueing into one of your house modules, which is so great. So here, let me preface it a little, and you'll go into detail because I know we've looked at these. Here is that tensile skin looking through cross section. This is the house is plugged in on the outside of the skin, and then we're looking at like the walkways inside. So people and pedestrian ways are on the top, and the pods are transported on the bottom. So if you're coming to your house, you would come on your pod, go in here, and park it down below, or if you're walking into the house, this is those entrances you were talking about where you walk into the house with these various different levels and a pool in the house. So why don't you go into detail, because it looks like a flower to me. It doesn't look like a house.
Well, it is a flower, and the idea of the flower is how flower tracks the sun. So it's sitting there and it'll track the sun during the day and things like that, and then it opens and closes.
And like when the weather's nice, it's open to the outside air, but if inclement weather or when it's moving, the whole thing can then shut.
And then it's like your hand. It can be level like that so everybody can walk on it, or you can start to move it up like this so it starts to enclose you, or it can be really like this or something. And then the skin itself has, if you feel moody and you don't feel good that day, you can make it all dark and purples and shut it down from society. But if you feel gregarious that day, you make it transparent or translucent, and you let the whole world interact with you. So there's this different options you have of actually, and this is all happening. You look at the new skins and this and that, it's all coming down the pike. When I was talking about it, people were doubting it. Now it's reality.
I know.
So anyway.
And then, of course, in between the top of the walkway and the bottom where the pods are is the infrastructure for all your heating, water, utilities, everything where the house plugs in. Yeah. So it's really all thought out.
And then this is a little pond of water in the house.
I think you have another picture of someone diving in.
Right. We're going to move from there, but I got these.
Water in your house.
Everybody is having a good time there, of course. So then we moved to the. Actually, this is from the front door of you're walking into your flying house, and you're looking at the view, which is over there in the background.
You can see like the mountains here. You could look down and see the ground like a mile below you. But then you see your pod is there, and this is a staircase going up to the upper level, and with all the plants, and it's just so organic and so fantastic. I mean, who wouldn't want to live in a house that looks like this compared to all those ridiculous suburban sprawled homes, the boxes?
But this is the problem I've dealt with, because I concur with you. I think exciting spaces are invigorating and everything, but the study has been what people feel is beauty is something they relate to. In other words, they look at squares as something they relate to, and they think it's beautiful because that's what they associate in their life. So we bring something new like this, that is strange, and that falls in another world. So I'm not sure. I think the youth are much more prone, and I was always pushing that. It's like any movement, the youth always grabs a hold of it first and then drags the adults eventually into it. So that is the idea. Anyway.
Well, right. Well,
you sell it.
Yeah, it's true. People are used to tradition, and that's why we keep doing things, the old-fashioned way. This is quite a departure.
Right.
And I have a feeling that there's a lot more people that are, shifting their consciousness, waking up, and something like this. Right. Its time is coming.
So this is...
Okay, we're inside of one of them, looking out across the city, and there it is. The person's diving into their pool from an upper level of the house, and someone's lounging over here. And here we can see the landscape is completely just open nature below the city. We see the ocean in the distance, and this, like I say, this would be many thousands of feet is what you conceive of this. So that there would actually be almost different climates.
Well, when I was doing this study, I studied airplane pilots, and in World War II, they could 8,000 feet they had to put their mask on. So this thing probably be limit about 5 or 6,000. That's it, because you don't want to be changing, going on an elevator up and down and
Your
things like
ears
that.
popping.
So but you can create, what the whole idea is, you create the density by going higher and so on. But you get certain values of alpine. You'd be skiing at the top of it, and you'd be in the bottom. You'd be doing a tropical, all this other stuff. So you have all these advantages, and you could actually, when you're on the inside, you'd be down, and then you go up above the clouds and you look down and things like this. There's all these other dimensions that start to happen.
But especially because it is so big three-dimensionally, it really can house so many more people than the sprawl.
Oh, yeah,
So like LA just goes for miles and miles in a two-dimensional sprawl, whereas in this city growing up like this, the amount of people that could live in just this area here would have covered all of the miles around it, because of the condensing. Like Paolo Solari says, complexity miniaturization, and we're bringing it into a 3D megastructure.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's the idea, and I think that's gaining some success. But we're sitting here with all these existing cities, and it's very difficult for them to sort of change the mindset. So anyway.
And here is one of the houses that has been able to leave the city. So your house, being autonomous, can actually go off to a distant hillside. So here we are miles away looking back at the city with the house, the kid and his dog.
It's sort of the motorhome. It's the motorhome, futurist motorhome. Basically you can do this. But it's already happening. They have these flying planes that land their homes now. Have you seen that? And so it's the motorhome now that becomes flying, and then now it's a flying plane, and you can go anywhere and open and close, and then they fly somewhere else. So, and they're doing it with a vertical sort of takeoff plane combined, that makes it work easily. So it's all happening. It's just, it needs to be more. I look at these things and I say, well, they should be a little more organic, and they come at it from the Art Center philosophy. Everything has to look like a super car, but that's not the idea. I think they should be more natural, like you see in nature, because though nature is totally structural and functional, that's the whole thing.
It's really incredible that it's actually 50 some odd years later, and yet this is still a cutting edge concept.
And as I mentioned, I have all these other projects in my life, and I keep forgetting about this one when I get involved, some new one, and yet this is the one that, I'm 85 years old, I'm leaving it for posterity, and I want it to inspire others to carry on. So that's the big push, and hopefully the young minds will take off with it and make something of it.
And so you were able to translate this project into a nearly built, practical, miniaturized version in the late 70s to build in Venice called the Green Machine. And we'll be showing all of the various photos of the models and illustrations of it so people can get a sense of what you were able to be able to use at the time that we could actually be built.
Once you do a project like a Biomorphic Biosphere, and people look at it, the majority of people looked at it as fantasy, then you have to come back to reality. And so I thought, well, what could I do? And there was a chance to buy a trailer park, I remember. So I took the idea of buying a trailer park, and I took it to the downtown, and Calvin Hamill, the director of planning at the time, and he says, forget buying your trailer park, we'll get a government grant and build the thing, and we'll call it, and so then that's the way the Green Machine, and got a National Endowment of the Art and a federal block grant, and it got almost built, but it was basically an ecological vertical trailer park with social implications for the poor, and a big playground for the kids, and vegetable garden on the bottom, and all this stuff that was happening.
So essentially it was a space frame structure, which of course were starting to be built in many places to make for a very lightweight but huge structure grid framework that would be infilled with lots of plants and growing and walkways and sidewalks. And then the homes were based on the idea of airstreams and other lightweight, easily movable homes, but you could actually design and build. Doesn't necessarily have to be just an airstream. It could be larger, and those are all plug in to this grid work of a beautiful little three-dimensional community.
Right.
One of the things I loved in your description of it was the ability to take slides going down. So it's very playful. And also every street, as we'll see in your illustrations, are covered with lots of greenery. And it's just a way to three-dimensionalize, essentially, like you said, a trailer park, but to start to bring in all the principles of what the biomorphic biosphere is about into a really practical way. And so something like that could still be made.
The structure was a space frame that was basically had levels that were 2 stories apart, so you didn't have the feeling that you were right on top of somebody, but you had room around you.
A project like this is a huge inspiration because it is a way to kind of start segueing into more three-dimensional urban environments that are beautiful. You know, like you have these views looking, down the sidewalks inside of the space, and they're just covered with fruit trees and plants. It's an idyllic type of neighborhood, and yet, it's actually feasible.
Yeah, it had a central corridor. In other words, it's basically what it was. A common hallway that went right down the middle like this, right?
Right.
And then it had these pods of basically just a big shelf to allow you to park your motorhome. I mean, these were Airstream trailers. In this case, on the bottom ones, they were quite large, and you could park 2 of them. And these are showing. And then I developed this sort of modular house looking the same, which is this thing we developed. It was actually 2 trailers connected, and got it all passed from Sacramento and everything because it was on wheels, and it dropped in here, and these were all really reasonable. I think it was $17,000 for the modular house, and the trailers were going for about $6,000 at the time.
And nowadays, people are doing tiny homes.
Right.
This would be a perfect infrastructure for people to be able to bring their tiny home, plug in, live there for as long as they want, and then if they want to move somewhere else, you could just take your tiny home off, move it somewhere else.
You got it.
It's essentially a three-dimensional tiny home neighborhood concept, which I think at this time here,
makes a hell of a lot of sense.
It makes so much sense.
Right.
So, you've put a lot of effort into thinking this through nearly 50 years ago, and now I think its time may come. So hopefully this will be a huge inspiration, for ways that we can start to develop our, urban neighborhoods in a practical way.
This was, I think, was quadrupling the density that was on a normal thing, and so it was 24 houses on an acre of land, basically, so that was pretty good, And it was all ecological. You had solar collectors. These are solar collectors on the tracking solar collectors, but they're sort of obsolete, but, they got newer ones now, and they had big solar panels on the end and so on, and all the water was recycled and on and on and on. And so all the stuff that we're talking about now, this had, and it's much further developed, and so it makes it actually reality. So we tried to make it almost the same thing as the biomorphic biosphere, self-sufficient as much as possible.
This has been really great. I think we covered a lot of ground on these particular projects, and I think in the future you have a lot of other interesting things that we'll do another interview with you to cover some of your other projects you've been developing. But I'm so excited and glad to have been able to do this with you today. Any closing thoughts or remarks to wrap this up?
I'm pretty amazed that Harlan did this. Let's put it that way, because I'm not the I'm not the guy that you push to get ahead in the world. And Harlan always from the very beginning, you saw that, and so we have this common bond of sharing this ecological thing that was very nice. And so I appreciate this, and I hope you can spin this to get something off of it.
We'll see. It'll be available for anyone to view anywhere in the world. So thanks so much. And thanks so much for watching with us today. And of course, remember to hit like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends that would be inspired and interested to see this. So until our next portal to the new earth, thank you all for coming today. And thank you, Glenn.